Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unraveling one of the most complex economic and geopolitical mysteries of our time. How exactly has the Russian regime managed to maintain macroeconomic stability in 2026 despite facing literally the most severe and highly coordinated international sanctions in modern history? To answer this, we're not going to rely on speculation or political rhetoric. We're going to conduct a strictly objective analysis of the facts, drawing directly from macroeconomic data, historical investigations, and international legal developments.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The KGB playbook. 2. Evading the sanctions. 3. Cracks in the armor. 4. The ICC dilemma. And finally, 5. The China pivot.
Section 1. The KGB playbook. Foundations of power. To truly understand the realities of 2026, we actually have to rewind all the way to the 1980s. Investigative journalist Catherine Belton argues that the tactics established by the KGB in East Germany basically formed the blueprint for the current regime and how it manages vast flows of capital. There's this fascinating insight from a former Soviet dissident, quoted in our sources, that perfectly captures the underlying psychology here. It says, "Putin cannot be bent, but he can be broken." I mean, this brilliantly sets the tone for everything we're looking at today. It suggests a regime engineered for immense, rigid resilience, one that absolutely won't compromise or bend external pressure, but one that might ultimately possess a brittle vulnerability if that pressure becomes absolute.
$800 billion. Let that sink in for a second. According to Belton's research, that is the staggering estimated amount accumulated and stashed away in offshore bank accounts by Kremlin insiders over the decades. And what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that this isn't just personal wealth, right? These slush funds, which are managed by trusted custodians, were systematically built up as a massive financial war chest long before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. This is literally the KGB playbook in action, establishing these complex, hidden financial networks abroad to insulate the regime against any future collapse.
Section 2. Evading the sanctions, the economic shield.
So, how did this historical playbook translate into surviving the massive Western sanctions we've seen over the last few years? Well, let's look at the hard data. For this, we're relying on the July 2025 Global Macro Views report from the Institute of International Finance, or IIF. They're providing the authoritative, objective macroeconomic data that's grounding our analysis today. And according to the IIF, initial sanctions failed to fully isolate Russia because global trade is highly decentralized, and Russia entered the conflict with incredibly deep financial buffers.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how they actually bypassed Western restrictions, specifically the G7 $60 per barrel price cap on Russian oil. A so-called shadow fleet of tankers was rapidly expanded from 150 ships up to 350 in under 2 years. This decentralized fleet successfully enabled Russia to just keep selling crude oil well above the price cap, demonstrating exactly how dispersed global trade can be exploited to blunt sanctions.
But hey, they didn't just need ships, right? They needed buyers. Notice this monumental pivot of Russian exports away from Europe and straight toward Asian markets. By 2024, China and India accounted for a staggering 41% of all Russian exports. This strategic reorientation, when you combine it with capital controls and a massive $700 billion reserve buffer, well, it provided a formidable economic shield.
Section 3. Cracks in the armor. Eroding buffers. Now, while that shield held incredibly well initially, objective economic indicators are now showing us that the regime's armor is being severely tested. The buffers are wearing thin. The clearest evidence of this delayed impact? It's right here in the GDP data. Between 2022 and 2024, the Russian economy actually grew by an average of 2.3%, which was heavily supported by massive wartime fiscal stimulus and defense spending. But look at the projection for 2025. The IMF projects a sharp drop in growth to just 0.8%. That wartime economic high is cooling off fast, and the structural strains are becoming, frankly, impossible to ignore.
Let's rapidly fire through the critical data points driving this slowdown. First off, to fight off inflation, the Central Bank of Russia had to spike its policy rate to a punishing 18%. Second, their crucial current account surplus is narrowing significantly because of softening oil revenues. Third, the EU just tightened the screws in their July 2025 package, lowering the official oil price cap down to $47.60 a barrel. And finally, this is the real wild card, the looming threat of 100% U.S. secondary sanctions targeting countries like China and India if they buy Russian oil. If enacted, the IIF notes this could outright contract the Russian economy and flip their current accounts straight into a deficit.
Section 4. The ICC Dilemma, Geopolitics and Law.
With economic walls closing in, the regime is actively navigating some geopolitical escape hatches in 2026, as reported by the Moscow Times. And this revolves entirely around the International Criminal Court, or ICC. Let's walk through this timeline together. Back in March 2023, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for President Putin. Under the Rome Statute, member states are strictly obligated to arrest him if he enters their territory. But then, pragmatism entered the chat. In August 2025, Switzerland offered potential immunity just to host peace talks. And then, in a highly unusual move in June 2026, the ICC actually announced an exception. A wanted head of state could potentially attend UN-led peace conferences without the immediate risk of arrest. Basically, the strict mandate to arrest a sitting leader is bending to the practical reality of global diplomacy.
This puts the international community on an incredibly tense legal tightrope. On one side, you have the pursuit of justice, the core principle that executing the warrant is essential to ending impunity for war crimes. But on the other side, you have the pursuit of peace, the very real possibility that short-term immunity might be the only way to facilitate UN-led negotiations to end a devastating conflict. We're looking at this completely objectively here. While supporters call this an elegant legal compromise, critics strongly warn that making any concession risks permanently normalizing impunity.
Section 5. The China Pivot, 2026 State Visit.
Finally, let's look at how Moscow is attempting to relieve both this economic and legal pressure through direct bilateral diplomacy. The most critical piece of this puzzle is President Putin's 2026 state visit to China, and this brilliantly illustrates their survival strategy. The visit established a four-pronged framework for a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership, according to analysis by MAPE. It focuses on 1. Consolidating political mutual trust. 2. Upgrading practical economic cooperation. 3. Cementing people-to-people exchanges. And 4. Building international coordination. Both nations are utilizing this partnership to inject stability and positive momentum into a rapidly evolving and highly fractured global landscape. For Russia, this relationship is quite literally the ultimate lifeline.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with the ultimate question. Will these strategic pivots and the incredibly deep reserves of the KGB playbook actually save the regime? Or, as those economic buffers erode and international pressure continues to mount, are the walls finally closing in? As the data shows us, the regime is remarkably resilient, but for sure, it is facing unprecedented stress tests in 2026. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the data, and I'll see you next time.